Somebody was asking me about pliers recently. This is a pair of pliers that I made to do the rewind button on these cameras. And basically I just took a cheap pair of pliers, not a super hard pair of pliers, cut the front off them with a grinder, because they were needle nose pliers when I got them, and holding them in the vise so that the jaws are firmly held together, centre punch mark in the centre of the jaws, and drill into it with a series of drill bits until you've got to the diameter you want. The hole never needs to be very deep for doing a job like that, but you could make a pair of pliers like that for any round object or button that you needed to be able to get to. It just so happens that the rewind button on these Retina cameras is one task that they're just ideally suited for. So that doesn't want to unscrew. That's a bit of a bugger. I'm just going to jam a rule down there and try again. That's better. I certainly couldn't hold that sprocket against the pliers with my finger because it hurt too much. Put that to one side. There's a washer in there and I want that. Get this back on the stand where I can see it. I'll unhook the spring, return spring for our, that's the catch. Well, this is grease in here, it's very, very sticky, which probably means that the frame counter at the top of the camera was stuck with the same sort of sticky, crappy grease. Right, the advanced shaft. Well, there's 3 screws hold this in place, and you can see them through the holes here. So I'll just get all 3 of them loose. Now they were fine, they're nice and tight in the body, they hadn't rattled loose at all. And if I can press that thing out, will it come? Sometimes this is bound in, and you can guess exactly what it's bound in. It'll be bound in with dried grease. That really doesn't want to lift off. It's making sure all those screws are completely undone. They are. That's really not enthusiastic about coming out. Oh yeah, I pushed it out from the top. There we have it. And I'll retrieve the other 2 screws that hold it in place. And here's the shaft. And the plate on the end isn't loose. This is grease. It's absolutely nasty. It's really thick and sticky, and that would certainly be a problem all by itself. You wouldn't need to look for other problems. That would be enough to cripple the camera, things like that. There's a screw here that holds the sprocket to the sprocket shaft. And that was our clutch falling out there. I'll just get this screw from the sprocket shaft out. It's sticking. It's sticking because it's greasy, and because the grease is sticky. Now I can push that shaft out, add that to our pile of pieces. The take-up spool's fallen out. It's got a metal bush in the base, and that is covered in sticky grease. Clutch. Well, let's pull the clutch out of here first. This is the guide bush for the film advanced shaft. That grease is very nasty. Here's the clutch. The clutch's job is to provide some controlled slippage. so that as the film builds up on the take-up spool, it's not ripping the film past the sprocket shaft and tearing film. That is everything out of the body until we get to the shutter. So to get to the shutter, you've got to remove the leatherette from the front of the camera. So hopefully the leatherettes will lift without too much fight. Although I feel fairly well stuck. The hardest part is getting around this flash boss here, because the leatherettes shrink over time. Not much, but enough to be problematic. So I'll have a fair grip around that boss. And with no play and no stretch in the leatherette to speak of, it's very hard to get that off over the top. Typically you've got to work back from the end and move in from the ends. Now I'm just running my scalpel on here, and again I'm just using the scalpel to lift that leatherette. I'm not scraping underneath it to any extent. Now at the corner of the body here at that edge, it's rounded, but it's not rounded very much. And anywhere you get a corner like that, the leatherette tends to stick very, very well. I'm just holding this up a bit, seeing if I can free the leatherette, because I really like to move my scalpel back in this direction. Now getting the leatherettes off cameras is often one of the most time-consuming parts of the job. When I worked for Kodak many years ago, well, the cameras were much younger then, of course, so the leatherettes were in better condition. They would have been quite pliable. But you never wasted any time getting leatherettes off cameras. If they put up any sort of fight at all, they were just taken off in pieces. And when you'd finished doing your repair, you simply got some new leatherettes from the spare parts department, and you installed those. Of course, everybody was very happy with that, because new shiny leatherettes are always going to look better than leatherettes with a few miles on the clock. And they were cheap enough, because they were readily available from the manufacturer. And it was much more economic in terms of using your time than fighting leatherettes off like this. But these days, of course, there are no new leatherettes. You can get aftermarket leatherettes for some models of camera. They never look exactly like the originals. It's alright if you're changing them as a set. Not much good otherwise. Right, this leatherette, let's see if I can get this off in one piece. This is playing hard to get. You can see I've got this, it's stuck quite well at that point. Oh yeah. I'll try coming in from the end. Okay, see if we can get under that. Can't afford to flex the leatherette too much because it'll crack. Sometimes the adhesive is very hard and brittle, and at other times it might be rubbery and gooey and very hard to get to part company. Now when you're fighting with something like this, every now and then you're going to have some minor disaster. Your scalpel might slip, you might cut something, the leatherette might crack. Don't just give up in disgust, just carry on, being as careful as you possibly can, because you can usually disguise small cracks and cuts without any problem. Okay, so our leatherette's off the camera body. Where to from here? Well, normally I remove the front rings. 3 screws hold those in place. All this is looking a bit grubbier now because we've got all the corrosion and crap from the front of the camera and dust from the leatherettes and so forth. Alright, those 3 rings come off. Put those carefully to one side. Make sure I've got the 3 screws with it. That post here, this extended post which came out through the front plate, that's got that little pinion on there, you want that off. And this little pinion here couples to the meter drum, so we want that out. Now, 4 screws hold the front section into the camera body. These will have washers behind them, cupped steel washers. Early cameras had 2 at each position, later cameras had 3 at each position. Don't lose them and don't leave them out. Occasionally you'll find cameras that have been assembled by someone who didn't really know what they were doing, where they've left them out because they're awkward to get into position. Right, see if I can get my shutter to lift free. Right, there's the front of the camera. And I'm really looking at this to see if there's any sign it's been serviced before. I know that the base of the camera, someone had been in there. There's not really much sign that someone had those front leatherettes up. Here's a film chip. Now, film chip is a piece of the film from between the sprocket holes on 35mm film. There's another one. Now they'll find their way through the camera. Just remove those washers. They'll find their way through the camera, and they can find their way to somewhere where they can actually jam things up. And an otherwise perfectly working camera can be completely crippled. I'll just take that cap. That is exceptionally sticky. That doesn't even want to rotate on there. That's the grease again. This camera, I'm absolutely surprised it worked as well as it did. We can take the drum off. And I can remove the meter cord. I'm looking at the state of this meter cord. If the cords are in good condition, I just reuse them. They were a silk, as far as I know. They're woven. They're very strong. It's a bit frayed at this point. I might replace that one. But if I didn't have a good replacement on hand, I would, you could reuse that without too much worry at all. So the camera body, anything to note here? Yeah, well, the mirror's loose. The mirror's loose on its tray. I'm going to take that mirror out and put it aside for safekeeping while I'm working on the camera. And when I put it back in place, I'll put a couple of spots of glue underneath it. Now the mirror surface itself, that's a front surface mirror. And it's a little bit dull and speckled. Some of that might be loose dust, and that might clean. Or it might just be deterioration of the surface. I'll clean this in an ultrasonic cleaner, but I will not be touching that front surface myself. Not with anything, not with a cotton bud, not with nothing. It'll be held in a clip, suspended in an ultrasonic cleaner, and it won't get very long. I just want to see if I can knock that dust off that mirror and put it aside so that it's not going to get a big fat fingerprint on it. That's our camera body for the moment. It's pretty nasty with sticky grease. It's going to need some cleaning up. I don't know what these arms will be like, whether they are moving freely or whether they're gooey. Once I've got the mirror out, I can experiment a bit with that. Let's put that body to one side. The shutter, front of the camera and shutter assembly. Now this is a bit unusual, the shape of this connection here at this point. There's certainly no sign anyone's made any adjustments here or even removed this in order to get parts out. So it's perfectly possible that this shutter has never ever been serviced. Yeah, I think that's probably the case. Alright, I have to start sorting out my parts a bit, I think. Just working on this, and I noticed the back catch didn't really want to work well, and it's not moving freely at all. I'm going to take those two screws out and clean those components up. Those screw heads are a little bit rusty looking. And there's probably there's a bit of sand and grit down there. I've got to remove that button. It should just screw in. I need to find the right pliers. Here I've got a pin vise and I'm putting that pin vise on that button, see if it'll unscrew. Yeah, it's coming out. That works well. Put the spring to one side. There's my button. That certainly made short work of it. That allows me to take that piece off there. I'll just look at the state of the body at this point. And it's just dust and grit under there. Some in the back of the door as well at that point. That might not have been pulling all the way across correctly. And, well, wouldn't you know it, here's a film chip. There's saying that film chips cause all sorts of problems, getting in places they shouldn't be. Here's another one. And in this case it was jamming the back catch. So on this body, what do I want to do next? I want to remove that mirror and put that safely to one side. So in order to achieve that, I would have lifted it at the front over the top of the tabs. There, there. And if I get in behind it, I can probably lever that forward. I can. So that's, oh, you can't see any of that. Sorry about that. I was just levering under the front of it lightly with a scalpel and pushing from the back to slide it forward. I'll put that carefully to one side. As you can see, I've got that mirror suspended here in a somewhat modified clip. I used to call these bulldog clips, I don't know what you used to call them. But I've reduced the spring tension on this considerably. If it had its normal tension, it could have damaged that mirror. So there's the mirror, shiny side down, or shiny side visible here, and that'll get cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner. But it's safe from any physical harm in that condition. So I'll leave that there. And I've got the body pretty much stripped as far as I need to strip it. The shutter, I'll deal with that separately. The body components, they can go in the ultrasonic cleaner. The back catch components here I'll leave out separately. I'll put those back on now. I'll deal with those by my... I'll just clean those manually. That way I won't have the back flapping about while I'm trying to work on the camera. These pieces straight off into the degreaser now. Before I do anything to this, I'm going to remove the rubbish from under the leatherettes. Now this is a mixture of adhesive and probably the surface of the leatherette itself. And a few mixtures of dust and dirt, I would think. But I'm just using the back of my scalpel blade here to scrape this rubbish loose. It's quite brittle and powdery. And I just need a good clean surface for when I finally reassemble the camera and stick the leatherettes back in position. And I'm doing this now before I do any more work to the camera, because this creates quite a bit of dust and dirt. And I don't want that settling into anything that I've cleaned and reassembled. So an old dry paintbrush is great for moving dust. and the front of the camera. You can probably get by just cleaning a surface like this with a bit of solvent, just to remove anything loose, and ignoring the rest. But if the leatherettes have been off and on a few times, you end up with an uneven build-up of adhesives and leftovers, and you can't get the leatherettes to lie down flat and smooth in that case, unless you remove all the rubbish from behind them. Yeah, this stuff's going to take some time. I'll bring you back when it's clean. Well, I've got the body fairly well cleaned up now. Got rid of all the grease and dirt from around the place. Reassembled my back catch. That's very positive now in its action. No problem there at all. I'm inspecting the action of the levers here that control the mirror and the capping plate. And in particular, this is the mirror one here. This would set the mirror down into the locked position. See if I can get it to activate. As it comes down, the arm on that presses on this lever, flipping it out of the way and allowing this latch to come in and hold it into the viewing position. And when you press the release, the action releases this and allows the mirror to flip out of the way. There's a third lever at the back, and this one at the back here controls the capping plate, and it's unusually stiff. It tends to stick. Yeah, it's sticking at the bottom of its action there. It looks to me like it's slightly bent and it's actually rubbing on this arm here. So I'll try pushing on the top of it, seeing if I can push it back. Usually that's a waste of time, and usually you've got to disassemble things in order to get them to go where you want them to be. But I'll just try that first. And I just want to make sure that thing actually moves down as far as it should. But it's certainly jamming up on something, and I suspect it's on this arm. Yeah, that all of those arms are a little bit stiff in their action, and the only good thing to do really is to remove the whole three from the body and clean everything and make sure everything's straight, free from grease and dirt, and put back. I was hoping to avoid that, and frequently you can avoid that. It's not something you need to do all the time, but I suspect that they're just a little bit sticky. Yeah, there's a little bit of distortion there perhaps, and combined with a bit of stickiness, that's probably all it takes. So much as though I hate doing it, I'm going to have to remove those components, and they're held in with two screws from the end here. Just loosen those slightly. Those screws hold this plate here in position, and that plate in turn holds those three rods in position. I'm going to remove the door from the camera. It makes it easier to get to these components. Again, that's not normally something I would do, but it makes it easier to get the screws back in place when I'm trying to reassemble it. pop that door to one side with the 3 screws so I don't lose it there. Now I've got good access to the back of the camera. Okay, right, I'll just change the battery here.